The lost tribes of Israel, an age-old myth, displaced from the Holy Land, scattered across the globe.
Since we were born, we told that the Lemba came out from Jerusalem.
The stories can be traced back to the time of the Old Testament.
These stones testify to the end of the story of the Israelite kingdom.
10 lost tribes, thousands of people. There must be something to show they existed.
It is even more original than modern Judaism.
Cutting-edge science on the trail of a millennia-old mystery.
There are two pieces to the puzzle. One is the story, the other is genetics.
If there is any truth to the myth, there must be descendants in unexpected parts of the world. South Africa, close to the Zimbabwe border. Robert Mbalengwa lives here. He belongs to the Lemba people and is a devout Jew, 6,000 kilometers from Israel.
To be a Lemba, you have to follow the roots for our forefathers. They teach us how we are a child of Lemba. You don't eat pork. You have to circumcise. Saturday even I don't work. I start to work on Sunday.
Rules that lie at the heart of Judaism. Robert Mbalengwa has grown up with them.
It's my grandfather was told us those things.
Although not officially recognized as Jews, the Lemba practice Jewish customs. They celebrate the Sabbath in the open air. They read from the Torah. The Lemba believe their people and faith originated in Israel.
We identify with the Israelites. We support Israel by all means because those are our people.
The Lemba believe they are descended from one of the lost tribes of Israel described in the Old Testament. 10 of 12 tribes are said to have been resettled by the Assyrians. But where are they now? According to legend, Jewish groups once crossed Africa to Zimbabwe and South Africa. Other tribes settled in similarly far-off places. A mysterious migration of a people more than 2,500 years ago. In the Old Testament, the story starts with Abraham, the main founder of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. His grandson Jacob, also named Israel, is the founding father of the Jewish people. Jacob has 12 sons with 4 women: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. They form 12 tribes, which make up the totality of all Jews in 1000 BC. They settle in present-day Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Autonomous Territories, and in a small corner of present-day Turkey. 10 of the tribes join to form the Kingdom of Israel. But the Jewish alliance is threatened by a major power. In the 8th century BC, Assyrian troops conquer the Kingdom of Israel. The inhabitants are removed and never return to their homes. Any traces of them are lost in history. Many devout Jews believe the descendants of the lost tribes are still living undiscovered somewhere in the world. The Old Testament tells us that after the Exodus, some ventured out to distant lands to return home one day. This sets in motion a historical mystery, which baffles researchers to this day.
These tribes were displaced. They moved vast distances, and that process of migration, of losing the connection with a homeland, also suggests that there is a grain of truth in this.
This age-old myth still has political repercussions today. In the 1980s, Israel's military brings several thousand Ethiopian Jews to Israel, claiming they are descendants of the lost tribes. Jewish communities in India are officially recognized as descendants of the tribes. Recently, an increasing number of groups have made this claim. Some long to belong to the Jewish people. Others hope to live in prosperous Israel. Migration justified by the Old Testament. This is not the only story of displacement in Jewish history, which makes it all the more difficult to find the 10 lost tribes. Since the early Iron Age, Israelite tribes have lived in the region now known as Israel. Even back in 1000 BC, Jerusalem was already a place of significance. In 587 BC, Jerusalem is conquered by the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar II's troops destroy the first temple. Thousands of Jews are forced to leave their homes and are removed once again, this time in Babylonian captivity. It is only decades later that the descendants of the displaced Jews are able to return from Babylon to their homes. In 515 BC, a new temple is built in Jerusalem. For more than 5 centuries, Jewish culture and religion flourish in the region. That is, until Jerusalem is conquered once again and the Romans destroy the Second Temple in 70 AD. Thousands are forced to leave their homes. Soon, the majority of the Jewish population live outside Israel, in what is known as the diaspora. Jewish communities spring up all around the Roman Empire. Sephardic Jews settle in southern Europe and the Iberian Peninsula, while Ashkenazi Jews put down roots in Central and Eastern Europe. Mizrahi Jews can be found in the Middle East and North Africa. The exodus even extends to India, where the first Jewish communities also emerge. The route to America only opens towards the end of the 16th century. Initially, the colonial powers only allow Christian sailors, settlers, and missionaries to travel to the New World. The first Jewish communities are founded in Brazil, Suriname, and the Caribbean, then on the east coast of North America. In the early 20th century, Jewish communities can also be found in Argentina, southern Africa, and the east of Russia. After the Holocaust, many survivors seek refuge in their former home country. On May 14, 1948, the State of Israel is founded. Returning to the Holy Land after more than 2 millennia of forced diaspora in distant countries. Ancestry is at the heart of Jewish identity. It is rare for members of other religions to convert to Judaism. A Jew is generally somebody born to a Jewish mother. The longer the line of descent, the better.
People are always trying to make sense of who they are, their place in the world, and the history of how they came to be. And so I think the idea that you could be part of these lost tribes can be appealing because it adds this deep history to your life. And of course, you could see yourself as part of a group of chosen people.
For many, the lost tribes are more than just a legend. Any descendants are invariably Jewish. This is another reason why scientists are looking for evidence all around the world. Place names from the Old Testament are considered promising leads. In the former territory of the Kingdom of Israel lie the ruins of several biblical cities, and one of the most significant excavation sites in Israel, Tel Megiddo. The remains of past civilizations tower over the fertile Jezreel Valley. It is here that archaeologist Aaron Ari is looking for evidence to support the story from the Old Testament. People settled here as early as about 4500 BC. Could a city of the Kingdom of Israel have stood here?
So basically, we know about the northern kingdom of Israel, both from the Bible, of course, and from extra-biblical sources, written sources, of course. But when you arrive to an archaeological site, you can really dig the history.
The first archaeological excavations in 1903 showed many cities built on top of each other in Megiddo. In an attempt to date the oldest settlements, subsequent expeditions dared to cut into the terrain. The incision reveals layers piled on top of one another like a cake. People settled here time and again. The lowest layer dates back to remains from the early Bronze Age. The layers above show the period of the city's greatest growth between 2000 and 1200 BC. At the very top, there are stones from the Iron Age, almost 3,000 years old, a settlement from the time of the tribes. Are there any signs of the next part of the legend? The military attack by the Assyrians? Aaron Ari climbs down to the lowest point of the site, 35 meters below the city as it stands today. Here, a 70-meter-long tunnel leads to the most important place in Israelite Megiddo, access to fresh drinking water.
The spring was outside of the city, naturally. It came out in a natural cave, and the settlers of the site knew about him for thousands of years. But during the Israelite period, let's say about the 9th or the 8th century BCE, they decided to construct this amazing and very sophisticated water system.
The Israelites of the Kingdom of Israel guided the water through the tunnel to inside the city walls, an absolute necessity in troubled times.
The fact that the spring is outside of the city wall, but the water is going inside and they are blocking the natural cave here, says that they were ready for war times.
A war against an all-powerful opponent. In 732 BC, the Assyrian attackers advanced at great speed across the plain to the city. Megiddo is taken. By 720 BC, all of the Kingdom of Israel's cities have fallen. Now the Assyrians control the region. In Megiddo, Aaron Ari looks for evidence in the ruins of the Israelite city.
You can really feel here the monumentality of this structure. It's not an Israelite dwelling, so we are standing on the central courtyard of one of 3 Assyrian palaces that were constructed here in the capital of the Assyrian district of Megiddo.
Using the foundations as well as literary sources, the archaeologists are able to reconstruct the building on a computer. The temple's design and size are very different from the more modest Israelite buildings in the surrounding area. The Megiddo temple resembles the Assyrian temples in Nineveh, or Assur, in present-day Iraq. The excavations in Megiddo corroborate the legend of the lost tribes. A Jewish group once lived here, and it was here that the Assyrians defeated them.
Basically, these stones testify to the end of the story of the Israelite kingdom.
But what then happened to the people of the Kingdom of Israel? Did they really survive, as the Bible claims? In London, historian Tudor Parfitt is looking for sources to support this theory. With over 1.3 million books, the School of Oriental and African Studies Library offers one of the largest collections of knowledge on the region. The documents the professor is interested in are stored in the museum's archive. Down in the basement, there are valuable manuscripts, rare editions, maps, and an extensive collection of photographs. What can they tell us about the fate of the lost tribes? Details of a mural from the ancient city of Lachish show us how the Assyrians treated people from the regions they conquered.
It's an interesting image because we have a mother with a child. It looks like the mother is kissing the child and embracing the child, and then a slightly older child behind the mother, and presumably these are captives being taken away from the land of Israel.
Another image shows the roles they play. The head covering of the armed man on the left shows he is an Assyrian. The four men are Israelites.
They're wearing caps, hats, which in the ancient Near East had a very particular significance. Their robes seem to be embroidered, and they're also wearing shoes.
Their clothing indicates the figures are members of the Israelite elite, leading figures.
Of course, they would take educated, literate, skilled people with talent, and they would re-employ them in a different part of the empire, which needed those skills. It's a more sensible way of operating than simply killing the elite.
The sources are very clear. The Israelites were deported.
We have a series of hard facts, and it would be completely wrong to say there's no such thing as the lost tribes.
The Assyrians tear the traditional tribe structures apart and resettle the elites in different places, somewhere within their huge empire. By the mid-8th century, the Assyrian Empire's reach is greater than ever before, stretching from present-day Turkey in the north to the Persian Gulf in the east and Egypt in the west. While the northern 10 of 12 tribes of Israel are forced to leave their homes, the remaining 2, Judah and Benjamin, are spared. In return for paying high tributes, they are allowed to remain in their settlement areas with the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the capital of the former Kingdom of Judah. The remains of the Second Temple become the central place of the Jewish faith, the Wailing Wall. Jerusalem is also a holy city for Christians and Muslims. Not far from the Old City, anthropologist Shalva Weil is collecting information on the 10 lost tribes. She is convinced that the remaining tribes of Judah and Benjamin kept the memory of their exiled people alive.
10 tribes were exiled, so everybody knew that their relatives had gone off somewhere else. Everybody knew because cities were empty. They took hostages away.
But where were they taken? In the Old Testament, the prophets Ezekiel and Isaiah speak about where the exiles might be found.
In Isaiah 11, chapter 11, verse 11, he talks about where these tribes are. Isaiah says God will ingather Israelites from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, and raise an ensign for the nations and assemble the outcasts of Israel.
In the Bible, 3 regions in northern Africa are mentioned: Egypt, Pathros, and Cush. Could the tribes have moved further south from here to the region in which the Lemba live today? In Johannesburg, anthropologist Edith Bruder hopes to get to the bottom of the myth. She specializes in Jewish faith in Africa. The Lemba are a very special case for her.
Il y a 20 ans, je suis tombée par hasard sur une
I heard about the Lemba in South Africa 20 years ago by accident.
Et j'ai été frappée par le fait
I was surprised to learn they believe their ancestors were Hebrews.
que leurs ancêtres étaient des Hébreux.
She is arranged to meet a young Lemba in the Glen Hazel Quarter. The place they meet looks much like the other houses on the street. But a piece of parchment on the doorpost, known as a mezuzah, tells us that this is a Jewish place. Oded Maramwidze hopes to become the first Lemba rabbi. But is he really a descendant of the lost tribes? The daily prayers are held in the traditional fashion. The synagogue furnishings, the kippah, and the prayer shawl, the talit, everything is just like it is in Israel. For the young Lemba, this is the legacy of his ancestors.
Thank you, Oded.
It's a pleasure.
What was the story of your ancestors?
The one thing that initially my aunt told me was about my great-grandfather. He used to observe kosher so staunchly that his friends and relatives who are not Lemba, they used to keep utensils in their houses so that only when he comes, that's when they open those plates to use them. But one day, they say that he was served food in utensils that were not kosher, and he ate unknowingly, and he vomited as if he was about to die.
Jewish dietary laws also govern the use of cutlery and crockery. Plates used for milk or dairy products should not come into contact with meat. The Lemba abide by similar laws. The researcher is also interested in social rules.
My aunt was especially fond of her grandfather. His daughter married outside, and he ended his life. That's how my great-grandfather passed away, because we're not supposed to have males from outside to join us.
Endogamy, the practice of only marrying within the community, also plays a major role in Judaism. It is possible to convert, but it is a lengthy and difficult process. Because Jewish communities don't do missionary work, only children born to Jewish mothers tend to become part of the community. But where do the Lemba customs, which closely resemble Jewish customs, come from? Oded Maramwidze does not doubt his heritage.
we always knew, like even my brother, whilst he is not as religious as I am, but we always knew from a young age that we are of Middle Eastern extraction. So my dream in that regard would be, I would like to go to Israel.
To fulfill his dream, Oded Maramwitsa is even learning Hebrew. And once again, he is the only Lemba in the group.
Anochi is a borrowed word from Egyptian language.
So are you trying to tell me that Anochi comes from Egyptian?
That's what I...
I'll prove you wrong.
All this to fulfill his dream of living in Jerusalem. But it is this desire to belong which makes the myth of the tribes so complicated.
The idea of reunification in your homeland with your group members is a really appealing one, and that myth really ties into the place Jerusalem as the location where that's going to happen, even though it's a pretty complicated place to live.
All those who consider themselves Jewish yearn for Jerusalem. So it is an obvious place to start the search for the lost tribes. Anthropologist Shalva Weil has dedicated much of her life to unraveling the myth from the Old Testament. She collects any information about where the descendants of the lost tribes may have settled. She tracks their journey using a map of the world.
It's documented in the Bible in different places, including 2 Kings and in the Book of Chronicles, and we have archaeological excavations and proof that there were Israelites in Iraq and in places which are on the border of Syria.
The area the Bible describes is huge. It stretches from Iraq in the east to the Arabian Peninsula in the south and Egypt in the southwest. The journey continues from here. But the stories Shalva Weil has compiled do not point in any clear direction.
Just go everywhere, 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 everywhere.
In addition to solid evidence like the Lemba, there's a lot of wild speculation. Christian missionaries plant the idea that Japanese samurai are the descendants of the lost tribes. They suggest the famous Shinto shrines resemble Israeli temples, and the name samurai comes from Samaria, the last capital of the Kingdom of Israel. But the samurai can only be traced back to around the 8th century AD. And their name is derived from the Japanese word for servant, saburai. Descendants of the 10 tribes are also believed to be in Northern Europe.
The Danish people from Denmark developed this myth that they are the tribe of Dan, Dan, Mark.
In the Bible, Dan is the 5th son of Jacob. But neither old Danish traditions or DNA comparisons can confirm this theory. When Europeans familiar with the Bible arrive on the American continent in the 16th and 17th centuries, they believe the indigenous people to be the descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. At that time, what is written in the Bible is considered historical fact. But the Americans' forebears come from Asia, and they didn't arrive in the 8th century BC, but at least 10,000 years earlier. The Gogodala people in Papua New Guinea. They also believe they are descended from ancient Hebrew migrants. They ask historian Tudor Parfitt to research their history.
Essentially what they said was that we've always been very ambiguous about where we came from, who we are. We just know that we came from another place, and we came in war canoes, and this was hundreds or thousands of years ago.
The religious practices of the Gogodala resemble Jewish rites. But something doesn't add up. They practiced ritual cannibalism until well into the 20th century.
The idea of a cannibalistic Jewish lost tribe is certainly fairly unique. It's unusual for a Judaizing group to have such beliefs.
Historian Tudor Parfitt believes Europeans spread the myth of the lost tribes in the Pacific region in the 17th century.
I think that the explanation of the ideas of groups like the Gogodala are to be found in human psychology rather than history. And I don't think any evidence will ever be produced demonstrating that indeed they did come in war canoes from the land of Israel 3,000 years ago.
There are many Jews around the world today that cannot trace their lineage directly back to Israel. And so for them, the story of Jews who have left Israel and don't know how they connect back to the home world are resonant. Separation from Israel becomes a separation from God. The desire to return to Israel is a desire to return to a relationship with the divine.
Another claim appears to hold more weight and relates to the land of Cush mentioned in the Bible. This land is said to have been partially located in what is now present-day Ethiopia. The region is home to the Beta Israel, a Jewish minority. The Christians in that country called them Falasha, which means landless. It is unclear when they first settled here. Throughout the 20th century, they are increasingly persecuted in Ethiopia. In the mid-1970s, the State of Israel starts to take action. In sometimes daring operations, the Israeli Secret Service Mossad smuggles thousands of Ethiopian Jews out of the country to Israel, by boat across the Red Sea, and later by plane. Israel creates the legal basis to do so in 1950. The first law to be passed after the state was founded is the Law of Return. It allows anyone of Jewish origin or faith to become a citizen of Israel.
The law of return is a standing invitation for estranged Jews to return to their homeworld. The high rabbi has to recognize the parents, the whole culture, the whole tradition, but if it is determined that there is a real historical expression of this mythic story of lost tribes, then it won't just be one or two people that can come back to Israel. The entire community will be invited back.
In 1975, High Rabbi Ovadia Yosef officially declares Ethiopian Jews to be descendants of the lost tribe of Dan. He refers to an Egyptian rabbi's assessment from the 16th century. Are the Beta Israel proof that the descendants of the lost tribes still exist? The problem is the Ethiopian Jews themselves don't agree. In Jerusalem, a large mural commemorates the cornerstone of their identity, a meeting between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Whether or not the legendary queen truly existed is disputed. However, the Old Testament and the Ethiopian national epic, the Kebra Nagast, both describe the two rulers meeting. Anthropologist Chalva Weil is familiar with the Ethiopian sources.
In the Ethiopian chronicles, Queen of Sheba came back to Aksum, the capital of Ethiopia, and found she was pregnant. And she gave birth to a boy called Menelik.
In 980 BC, this Menelik is said to have founded the Ethiopian Empire in present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea. Ethiopian rulers invoke this lineage for many centuries.
Now, most of the Ethiopian people, Christians, and certainly the what were the Falashas, the Beta Israel, claimed that they came from the King Solomon and Queen of Sheba. They are descendants of that lineage.
The problem is the Bible claims King Solomon ruled in the 10th century BC, more than 200 years before the Assyrians invaded. The Beta Israel cannot be descended from both Solomon and the tribe of Dan.
It's a total contradiction. In their hearts, many Ethiopian Jews don't accept this, but they're so relieved that this brilliant rabbi thought of a way out of their problem. And they have been recognized as the tribe of Dan.
In recognizing them as a lost tribe, the High Rabbi avoids a lengthy process and saves thousands of lives. But it should not be taken as evidence supporting the legend of the lost tribes.
Now, we can't possibly find written proof to back up all of these claims. So what historians must do is to look at cultural practices, at religious actions and rituals, to see if they can be related to something which we do know has a Jewish tradition, but which has survived the centuries.
And indeed, there are cases where traces of Jewish heritage can be found in surprisingly far-off places. Anthropologist Edith Bruder travels to the north of South Africa, the home of the Lemba. The city of Thohoyandou lies 6 hours by car from Johannesburg. Many of the 50,000 Lemba live here. The anthropologist hopes to find clues to their ancestry in the way they live. Jewish rites could have developed very differently in Africa than in Jerusalem.
This is exactly what happened in the aftermath of the attack.
In the village of Chamoutilikwa, Edith Bruder and religious scholar Magdel Leroux attend the Sabbath celebration of a small Lemba community. Do the Lemba celebrate the Sabbath as might be expected from descendants of Israelite tribes? The ceremony only vaguely resembles the service in a synagogue. The reading of the Torah is reserved for the oldest woman in the community. There are no fixed traditional rules here, as is the case in Judaism.
This is really not a typical Jewish way of celebrating the Sabbath.
And something else stands out. Typically, work of any kind is forbidden on the Sabbath. Cutting wood or cooking on the day of rest is unimaginable for Orthodox Jews. But for the Lemba, this is part of the celebration. Do these particularities suggest the practices are not rooted in Israel, or that they are?
It is even more original than modern Judaism. They are more close to ancient Israelite religion and culture. They are remnants of an ancient type of religion that you don't get elsewhere easily. So in a sense, to me, as an Old Testament scholar, it is a kind of a living source to see what the practices were in the ancient Israelite period.
The researchers believe there is much to suggest that the Lemba's practices originate in ancient Israel. Only the question of how they arrived in South Africa remains unsolved.
When you're not dealing with a fixed set text, can you actually get to the heart of a story if it has changed so many times in the retelling across centuries? Well, I think you can. It takes care and it takes looking at the sources from a number of different perspectives, comparing, synthesizing accounts. But at the heart of these stories, there is something that is passed down and remains intact across time.
In a graveyard outside Tohuyandu, Edith Bruder hopes to find further clues. It is here that she meets the vice president of the Lemba Cultural Association.
All my females have been buried here in this cemetery.
The Lemba's dead are buried in a separate part of the graveyard. Testimony to the group's self-awareness and identity. The gravestones tell their own story.
If you go to any graveyard, the moment you just see Star of David, you must know that it's a Lemba.
As opposed to the rest of the graveyard, the Lemba's graves lie in parallel. They all face the same direction.
The head must face north, remembering where we are coming from Sena.
Sena, the name of a mythical city the Lemba believe they originate from. In 1992, historian Tudor Parfitt sets out to find the city of Sena. Ancient stories told by the Lemba help him in his mission.
My idea was to go from village to village where Lemba were living in South Africa and Zimbabwe and try and follow the footsteps that they had taken from Sena. Part of the legend was that when they got to Africa, they rebuilt Sena. And on the Zambezi River, there is indeed a town called Sena.
The site appears strategically advantageous. Sena is located in Mozambique, on the Zambezi River, connecting it to the ancient trade routes via the Indian Ocean. For historians, a clue as to where the Lemba's ancestors might have come from the Arabic Peninsula, from present-day Yemen.
We know that there have been connections between the Arab world and South Africa for centuries. Trade routes were established across the Indian Ocean and then down the coast of Africa centuries ago, all made possible by the reliable and the dependable trade winds.
As Tudor Parfitt discovers, it is in the region of Hadramaut, of all places, now strictly Islamic, that the Lemba's odyssey started.
We know that in the Hadramaut, in that valley, there were Jewish communities before Islam. One of the weird things I discovered was that the tribal names in that area were the same as the tribal names of the Lemba.
In the east of Yemen, Tudor Parfitt finds the city mentioned in the ancient stories of the Lemba. It is also called Sena, like the city on the Zambezi River. The Sena in Yemen has a history which makes the historian prick up his ears.
There was a tradition that it had once been served by a dam. The dam had broken. It was no longer possible to have any kind of agriculture around it, and the people were forced to leave. And the tradition was that they had gone from Sena to Africa.
The name and location of the city, similar surnames, and local legends, a striking number of clues.
Finding Sena in Yemen weaves historical facts into the mythic memory. And when we start to see alignment of various details like the boat, clan names, different traditions, it starts to put together a picture. And it leads us to wonder if it's really possible that they are indeed a lost tribe.
Historian Tudor Parfitt believes that the Lemba's forebears are Arab Jewish traders from Yemen who initially settled on Africa's coast. But if that's true, there must be traces of this ancestry in the Lemba's genetic material. A team of scientists sets out to unravel this last mystery using DNA analysis. Is it possible to prove kinship between modern Lemba and Israelis? 3,000 years after the groups were separated? The results of the first tests in the year 2000 are sensational. Media worldwide report that the Lemba and Israeli Jews have striking similarities in their genetic makeup. A second study, 13 years later, is less clear. But why? In Leipzig, employees at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology hope they can answer this question. Stefan Schiffels is an archaeogeneticist. He uses DNA to research human origins.
Within human variability, we know the places in the genome that are variable.
Humans differ in well over 3 million places in their genetic makeup. The closer their kinship, the greater the number of matches. Analyzing the data makes it possible to identify regions of origin.
Over millennia, slight differences develop between people who live on one half of the globe and people who live on the other. And the closer you look, the more subtle the differences are within continents.
Researchers have therefore set up databases. These show which genetic features crop up most often in which regions.
For example, let's say I have reference points around the world colored red, yellow, and blue, and I have somebody with a purple profile. Then I know, okay, it must be a mixture of red and blue. And it works much like that with genetics, just on a much larger scale.
But how reliable is this method? And what are its limits? Hopefully, an experiment can answer this question. 3 volunteers send in DNA samples for analysis. Stefan Schiffels discusses the results with the volunteers. Sui was born in China. The DNA test identifies that. According to the test, almost 70% of her ancestors come from China, 20% from Mongolia.
I'm surprised that more than a fifth is from Mongolia.
It might just mean that you have North Chinese ancestry.
I know I do. My father's side of the family comes from North China.
The database doesn't classify North China as a separate region. That is why Sui's test claims her ancestors are from Mongolia. Melina's father comes from Indonesia, her mother from Germany. Cambodian characteristics dominate the analysis, but there are also traces of European ancestry.
When you read something like this, you need to remember that you are not really looking into your past. The analysis is more current, using comparative groups that are available now.
Melina's test also gives her at least a vague idea of her ancestry. It is more accurate in regions of the world where the database is larger. Nick's analysis shows he has exclusively European ancestry. The breakdown is surprising. Over 5% of his ancestors are Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe.
Of course, Jewish is a religion and not an ethnic group, but Ashkenazi Jews are a group which is relatively clearly delimited both genetically and ethnically. What's interesting is that the group has a very specific makeup, incorporating a Middle Eastern component and a European component.
Due to rules surrounding marriage, Jews tend to have more genetic matches with one another than with their geographical neighbors. The DNA analysis has identified the genetic makeup of all 3 volunteers. The researchers in Leipzig hope to be able to unravel the mystery surrounding the Lemba ancestry as well. The series of tests have so far yielded contradictory results. How should they be evaluated today?
Initially, it was just about characterizing the genetic diversity in the Lemba, and at the same time, they particularly looked at the Y chromosome.
Among the Lemba, as well as in Judaism in general, there is a clan of priests who pass on their position and surname from father to son. The Kohanim in Israel and the Buba clan among the Lemba. The researchers specifically searched for matches in the descendants of these 2 groups and found similarities in the Y chromosome. But there's a problem. These similarities can be identified throughout the Middle East.
The hope was that the study could be broken down even further. So you could say that's not just somebody from the Middle East, but a very specific group in Israel. But that isn't something that ended up happening.
Despite this, the tests clearly indicate the Lemba originate from north of the Sahara.
You can say the fact that 75% of the Y haplogroups are now mainly found outside sub-Saharan Africa means that we can say with relative certainty that a major part of the Lemba's descendants must have arrived in sub-Saharan Africa from West Asia, from the Middle East somewhere.
There is much to suggest it was Jewish traders who came to Africa.
There are 2 pieces to the puzzle offering an insight into the past. One is the story and the other genetics. To some extent, both these puzzle pieces and pieces of history overlap. That's fair to say.
Historic migration from the north to South Africa. Whether the migrants can really be traced back to the lost tribes of Israel is hard to say. In any case, the Lemba have no desire to be a lost tribe.
We know our roots, that we are not lost. It is because only our history it is not written down.
The search for the lost tribes of Israel has led to fantastic theories and speculation. Recent research now suggests at least one of these theories is likely to be true. The myth of the 10 lost tribes reflects part of human history. It starts with a crime committed by Assyrian conquerors and the first of many expulsions from Israel. But for Jews around the world, the myth is one thing above all else, a belief in the unity and coexistence of the Jewish people.